Today on New Mexico Rising, we have a conversation with Aubrey Dunn, former New Mexico Commissioner of Public Lands, a rancher, and the independent candidate running for the first congressional district here in New Mexico. Stay tuned.
Today on New Mexico Rising, we're going to be having a conversation with Aubrey Dunn. Longtime resident in New Mexico, Mr. Dunn spent 25 years in the banking industry, including 10 years as CEO and president of First Federal Bank of New Mexico. He served as New Mexico Commissioner of Public Lands from 2015 to 2019, where he switched party affiliation from Republican to Libertarian in 2018. At which point he announced his candidacy as a Libertarian for U.S. Senate, but later withdrew, citing his need to concentrate on his duties as land commissioner. As a self-described workaholic, Mr. Dunn has seen success in the real estate industry, as well as operating a 28,000-acre ranch in central New Mexico. He's running to fill Interior Secretary Deb Haaland's CD1 seat in a special election on June 1st. Mr. Dunn joins us today to have a discussion about the challenges New Mexico faces, as well as possible solutions, and what he hopes to accomplish as an independent candidate for Congressional District 1. But before we get into that, Thad, what's it like to breathe again?
I almost feel like singing that Tony Braxton song, Breathe Again, Breathe Again. It feels a little liberating.
Sing that song? If you feel like singing it, why don't you go?
Well, I thought about it for about a second, but I don't want to, it's pretty early. I don't want to wake anyone, and I don't want to lose us any more viewers than we're probably going to lose anyway. Right. But no, I kind of enjoyed being able to, walk into a Walmart like a boss and be like, yeah, it's all good. And it's funny, right? Like I still have this, I guess this psychological tick about wearing the neck beard, i.e. the gator, just in case, you run into some hypochondriac type or some person who has been basically scared to death by the last 12 months, just to make sure that I don't, from a polite, in a polite society, not scare anyone. But it's been pretty liberating. We actually went to my youngest daughter's graduation where people wore their mask coming in, but once it was very apparent that no one else was going to, no one was wearing a mask. So it felt normal, other than the fact that it was it was a much smaller graduation ceremony than we're used to down here. I don't know what to say. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Free at last. Thank God Almighty, free at last.
Well, I mean, I can understand that. I went to dinner last night. It was kind of the same deal where, nobody was really wearing them. There were your random hypochondriacs, as you say. But, it was pretty normal. The service was a lot worse.
Well, we're going to be dealing with that forever, right? Part of everything I've seen is that a lot of staff are being required to still wear these masks. And I think what we tend to point to the obvious reason why the staffing issues exist here in the state. And it's the simple fact that we still have very generous unemployment benefits, and plus the federal government top up. Now, granted, we've, reinstituted work search requirement, but look here, man, why would I want to go making, I don't know, $11 to $15 an hour, depending on where in the state you live, and still be subject to wearing that thing all day?
Yeah.
And you're greatly understaffed, so you're working twice as hard. Until this mask hysteria kind of goes away, until we get the public school system and or this, the summer camp and summer school system up and running, and until we stop the, federal government top up, you're really not going to see an increase in staff. And so you're just going to see a degradation in service.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it is. I don't know what anybody expects out of that. I mean, I know I mentioned that it felt like we were dealing with the second stringers. You know, well, I mean, everybody who did have jobs, and like you mentioned with the unemployment, I mean, why would they?
It
This is
doesn't seem to make any
the
sense. And
problem.
then, yeah, it doesn't seem to make any sense. And there's one smaller component that is less, I think, is less of a factor, is the fact that like maybe there are actual employees who believe they're immunocompromised
Mhm.
and just don't think they should go back until they can be guaranteed 100% safety. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's going to hurt, but it's just good to be able to walk into a place and know that you can walk into the place, dine in, hang out, not necessarily get. I mean, you're still going to probably get the side eye from
mm,
some people who kind of clenched to their like I said, clenched to their masks like rosary beads.
mhm.
Um, but I don't know, man. We'll get there though. But I think there's still some darkness ahead, and there's still some turbulence ahead until we can get back to some sense of normalcy.
All right, yeah. Before we start taking too many black pills, let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Aubrey Dunn. We're very happy to have you here. How are you doing this morning?
I'm great. I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Oh yeah, it seemed to make sense. You know, like I said, we don't want to start picking at things too hard right off the bat. But why don't you talk to everybody and kind of tell some of the good things in New Mexico, your experiences here, what you love about this state.
Well, I was raised down in near Alamogordo in a little town called High Rolls. A lot of people don't know where that is, but they raise a lot of cherries and apples down there, and I was raised on an apple farm. My father was in the newspaper business and was a state legislator for quite a few years. Um, New Mexico has a special place and a special culture, and at times I think we lose sight of uh, who we are or where we are. This race has kind of brought that out, but there's a I live out in the middle of nowhere, and so I get to experience the state in a way that a lot of people don't, and I
Sure.
see it every day. And one of the big problems we're going through right now in rural New Mexico is this drought, and it's going to affect all of us, including the urban areas.
What do you think some of the solutions to that are? I mean, are there things that you could do from a congressional position to handle or improve that issue with the drought? I mean, a lot of people would say that there's climate change going on. I mean, what is your attitude about that? Do you think there needs to be legislation to offset what's going on?
Well, I think the climate has changed. It's always changing. If you look back through the years, this area where we live is um, Launch, New Mexico. It, at one time was the pinto bean capital of the world. And right now you couldn't grow one to save your life without having irrigation. So, the climate's changing. Whether we can affect it as people, I'm not, I question that. One thing we could do for water is we could get rid of a lot of the invasive species, especially the cedar trees. We're doing that here at our place, and as land commissioner, we did a lot. We improved over 50,000 acres of land, removing mesquite and cedar. And what that does, it puts water back in the ground. And somehow, we have to deal with the resources we have. And one way to do that to get rid of all the trees that are sucking out. The average cedar takes between 15 and 30 gallons per day, and some of these acres have 300 trees per acre. And just you do the math, there's a lot of water we're losing. So, that'd be one way as far as congressional. Um, maybe offering some plans to where uh, we fallow some of our land for a few years to save on water and pay people not to grow.
Mm,
That would be an idea, but somehow we're going to have to work around it.
sure. I mean, I think water is a huge issue in this state. Always has been, I believe, and always will be. When we sit here and we talk about other issues, you're running as an independent. Um, why?
Why? Um, well, everybody talks about you've been a Republican, you've been a Libertarian. Well, actually, first 30 years of my life, I was a Democrat. My father was a Democrat. I was raised and saw the changes in that party. I've seen the changes in the Republican Party. I don't really see much difference between the two, to be honest. At one time, the Republican Party was fiscally responsible, and we wanted a balanced budget, but I haven't seen that in the past. Both parties are growing our national deficit at alarming rates. And then when you look at the Libertarian Party, I mean, that's probably the closest to my views on everything else, but they just, Chris Manning had a report on how much money he had raised. It was $4,000, I think, so far. And it's just hard to get any traction as a Libertarian. So, but as an independent, you're not tied to any party or any top party or leadership. And it's really refreshing not to have to deal with that. And I think the future holds for independence, but I'm not so far sure how long it's going to take for it to be really changed.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, because I think last time you ran as a Libertarian, or at the very least, as land commissioner, you switched over to Libertarian Party. I was privy to that when you came to the 2016 convention and stuff like that. And you, of course, again, you're running now as an independent. What stopped you this time around as someone who kind of ideologically aligns more with libertarians from running with the Libertarian Party of New Mexico? Can you discuss that in some detail?
Yeah, I don't think the Libertarian Party of New Mexico, libertarians have gotten a bad rep, and I think they're seen mainly as a fringe group and have focused more on trying to be different rather than to get the message out. It's great that everybody has individual preferences or ideas, but somehow you can't be seen as just the outside party. The Libertarian Party, in my opinion, has gotten that tag, and I just don't see how they're going to go forward. Gary had a good shot as state Senate or U.S. Senate last time. But in that race with the two parties dominating, it's hard to break through as a libertarian. So I really think the answer is independent and not tied to any party. And I think that's kind of where the future's headed, in my opinion.
I mean, truth be told, I mean, the history of independent candidates, I mean, no disrespect to my libertarian brother, and has been much more successful, from Ross Perot to Jesse Ventura. These men have either been very, very close to the reins of power or have actually governed. So right. I can kind of understand that thinking. But I mean, what is the, I guess, some of the criticism we've been seeing in some of the forums here when we basically said we were going to have you on was the fact that you were going to, particularly in this state, split the conservative and or Republican vote, because, despite what many conservatives and many libertarians don't like to say is they are very ideologically aligned. What do you say that you're to those who says you're just going to split the vote to make it impossible for Republicans or even libertarians going forward to ever attain any sort of congressional seat or state office?
Well, I think when you look at CD1, Joe Biden got 69% of the vote. And so when you look, I don't think Mark Moore's had a chance, whether I was in the race or not. And if you look at the early voting so far, and I think there's 50,000 votes right now, approximately, but the large portion of those are Democratic. And to go back to the 69% that voted for Joe Biden, I don't think they voted for Joe Biden because they liked Joe Biden. I think they voted against Donald Trump. And I think a lot of New Mexicans weren't happy with the choice of the Republicans in the last general election. And so I don't think it was so much a vote for Joe Biden. I thought it was a vote against Donald Trump. And as you come into this race right now in this special, I think I'm not trying to steal Republican votes. I'm after Democratic votes, because you can't win CD1 without Democratic votes. If you look right now, Democrats are voting 2-1 to Republicans. So how can you say I'm stealing Mark Moore's votes when he has no chance? Because I think there's less likelihood of a Democrat voting Republican than a Democrat voting independent. And so I think we're a choice now for Democrats where Mark Moore's is not. So I really don't think we're hurting Mark Moore's. I don't think he had a chance to begin with. And yeah, we may be splitting some of the Republican vote, but I think we're picking up more Democrats than he is.
Well, moving away from politics
Hmm.
and that, well, if we can, we'll get into the BS part of it later, perhaps. But okay, so as we come out of this pandemic, hopefully, I have my doubts, and we move forward. I mean, what do you think are the biggest issues that face New Mexico on just a daily basis that could be addressed on a congressional level?
I think that everyone in New Mexico talks about we want jobs, but we can't get anyone attracted to New Mexico if we're last in education and first in crime. So how can Congress help on that? And kind of the idea I've been pitching is on education. I think we need to start a system within our schools where people are trained vocationally versus everybody on track to go to college. I don't think it's necessary, nor when you're having a 50% dropout rate or 40% dropout rate. Those kids aren't not only not going to college, but they're not finishing high school. So I think we need to fix a way where kids can finish high school. And it's kind of odd. Back when I grew up in Alamogordo, we had a PE teacher named Jim Griggs who started a vocational program where every year the Alamogordo High School would build a house in Alamogordo. And as part of the class, you would get out of school, you'd go to the building site, and you'd frame or do construction work or roof or plumbing or whatever. And I think what we need is for kids when they're in high school to have two tracks. If you want to go to college, great. But if you want a job when you get out, let's make you a apprentice electrician or a plumber or something that when you get out of job, you got more than a $15 an hour job, but you got a $20 an hour job. And that's what I want to. And so how would Congress fix that? I think target funds to go to vocational training versus college. Two, I think.
Yeah, and okay,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No.
Oh, I was just gonna second that, right? I mean, I was having this conversation with someone, closer to my age and stuff and older about vocational training. I tend to remember growing up in the South and stuff like that. There are these things called magnet schools and vocational schools, and they were attached to high school. I went to an electronics vocational course. I got to school, I did first period, I got on a bus, and I went to the vocational school to learn electronics. And in other areas of particularly in the Virginia area, there were magnet schools for aerospace, for welding, particularly welding because of the shipyards, for computer science, for math and science and stuff like that, chemistry, biology, medical. Yeah, I don't know what happened to that over the last 20 years. It almost seems like it just vanished.
Right. Well, I think the teachers unions have gotten in control, and that's not part of their deal.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the teachers unions as part of that. When we talk about the trades, that's really in my wheelhouse. And what I've seen typically is that when money does go to those programs, the labor unions eat it up, and there's a lot of argument about that. I mean, obviously, I've known a lot of union guys over the years, and the attitude, but that's something that I've seen is that the unions are and do have an unfair advantage when it comes to who gets federal dollars or state dollars for any of these programs. So, I mean, I think that that's a big problem even with that, not to get too far off into the weeds here, but, until we deal with the unions as entities and how they take the majority of all these dollars, I'm not sure that you're going to see a lot of growth in that.
Right. Well, to me, we have to start somewhere to save these schools. That's one idea I have. And crime's the other one, and I think we need to figure out how to get more police and get the DOJ out of Albuquerque police. And I think in talking to the police officers, I think a lot of the problems comes from our drug problem. So they're kind of tied together. So how we deal with that on a federal basis is get the funds directly into training versus buying any type of military equipment for the police.
Well, it seems kind of like a circle where you have crime, because of poverty. The crime leads to, no jobs, and the no jobs leads to poverty, and it's chasing its tail a little bit on the entire thing. I mean, obviously New Mexico is not known for being very good when it comes to your chances of being a victim of violent crime.
No, but I think but if you go back to the vocational ed and you get the kids working versus on the streets, there's got to be a way to do it.
You talk about police, and one of your more controversial positions has to do with qualified immunity. Why don't you take some time to lay that out in a little more detail than maybe you're given sometimes?
Yeah. When you talk about qualified immunity, I don't think we can turn around and completely not indemnify police for their actions, just like any other public official. But I think we have to figure out a way that it's not quite as carte blanche, and a little more focused on how we deal with immunity. And so I agree, it's a controversial area and is very complicated in how we deal with it, but we still need to give immunity to our police officers so they can do their job every day and not worry about losing their house and their homes and their family.
Yeah. I think that's one of those issues where really what we've seen is it may be overused, because it has to be brought up in court. It's not like it's just, the way it is. So maybe that has to do with attorneys and the way they handle things, and the cities themselves, where they have to start taking more responsibility for these issues case by case. And
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I know people's concern is that what you're going to see is that a lot of police are just going to leave. If you were to strip qualified immunity or even lessen it, and there may or may not be reality to that, but I think we're entering into a time in this society where something's going to be done about it one way or the other.
Well, the police are leaving for other reasons, right? The qualified immunity portion of it is just, to them it would probably just be a nail in the coffin. But I mean, generally speaking, a lot of these big city police departments are dealing with city councils and district attorneys that are not prosecuting.
Right.
And I understand that we wanted to institute restorative justice, and we didn't want, police encounters that would end in death unnecessarily. Hence why we dealt with, particularly in the Albuquerque metro area, the DOJ, upper butts for the last decade. However, I think that pendulum, in my opinion, has shifted far to the side of, giving no power to judges, giving no power to the police and whatever. And I think it's just a catch-22. And I think that also breeds a resentment among the police corps for why you have now very negative interactions or no interactions between police and the citizenry. So yeah, I think long before we deal with qualified immunity, I think we need to deal with the fact that there's just no support in the particularly urban areas where police are kind of needed, unfortunately, because criminals are just kind of being let out. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, Mr. Dunn, or what your feelings are about the leniency that we see in a lot of our big blue cities when it comes to criminality.
Well, I think when you look at Albuquerque, we need to figure out a way to stop the revolving door of everybody just getting picked up, put an ankle bracelet on them, and turn them loose. And I understand why Judge Daniels did the bail deal, because if only people that have sufficient funds are the ones that are able to make bail, that's not right either, for the same offenses. But I think what we need to do is put money into monitoring people so that when they step out of their house, there's somebody waiting on them and saying, you got to stay there. There's got to be, we can't keep having this revolving door. I mean, it's just not working. And, you talk about the DOJ the last 10 years, but crime is skyrocketing, not going down with them here.
Yeah. I guess so. We've discussed crime, we've discussed education, we've discussed jobs. But as a congressional candidate and potentially a member of Congress, you'll be having to deal with the border, right? Because we're a border state, and
Right.
we have concerns. Some of them are humanitarian, some of them crime, some of them economic. I guess about your views on the border.
Well, if you look at the two different administrations, at least under the previous administration, the flow was controlled. Um, but on the other hand, we've got a guy, he's not working for us, but he's working for a contractor here who's been working in the United States for the last 20 years on work visas. And it took him 2 years to get his work visa through under the previous administration. And there's a lot, and he's not here to vote or take American jobs. He's here because he has the opportunity. So I think we need to figure out how we can have a green card or resident or worker program where people can come here and work without a lot of hassle, and pay taxes and not be abused by employers trying to keep them in the dark. The other thing is, I think we need to work on a resident alien program. I mean, there's people that want to come here and work, but they have no desire in, living off our system, but adding to it. And so I think we need to protect our border and control it. But on the other hand, I think we need to open up and have better availability for people to come here and work.
Yeah, I don't know what changed. I tend to remember I told this story before when we had another congressional candidate on, where people. I grew up in South Carolina, and we had lots of farms out there on the islands. And I tend to remember in the summer when I was a kid, uh, Mexican immigrants coming up, staying on these farms, and helping during the summer and into the fall, and then they would go back home because you're right, they had no desire to stay here, right? But at some point, it became harder for them to egress the border, and so you had a choice. Once you crossed over, just kind of stayed and kind of kick it in the shadows, or go back home where there was little to no opportunity because of things like the drug war and NAFTA and whatever. We can go down that rabbit hole all day long. And I guess what you're kind of talking about is getting back to kind of where we were in like the late 80s and early 90s, where like egress was pretty easy and people could just go back home. Where now this seems like you're going to have to make a choice one way or the other. And you're almost kind of forcing people to live in the shadows, because it's just like, well, if I go back, I can't come back next season. And
Right.
that's what I kind of hear when I hear your solution. There's a common sense solution to all this. I think unfortunately the two major parties have like very extreme views because of their constituents and the experience of their constituents, right? Let me just lay this out. A lot of Republican voters and GOP voters and types live in kind of rural areas. And yeah, some, they see the good and the bad of having, immigration come in, but they also see their culture changing, where your urbanites tend to embrace open immigration because, I mean, it's just, cities are different. They don't see them. They're out of sight, out of mind. They like the fact that it contributes to the fabric of their community. And so now you have two parties that are just extreme, right? The current administration, as you've alluded to, it's just like, all right, just let it all hang out. I mean, come to find out, I mean, now secretly they're actually trying to finish a lot of the border wall and control, and they're actually taking the previous administration's tactic of trying to control the flow, right? They still want the flow,
Right.
which is fine. I've always been cool with the flow, but like if you can't control it, then you have a tendency, because of statistical averages, of letting in a criminal element. Well, at the same time, a lot of communities on this in southern part of this of the United States see the good and the bad of having unfettered immigration and cultural changes. So I mean, not that there's much of a question in that, but like I don't know if that's a sentiment that you've gathered, kind of living, in the more rural parts of the state versus some of the more urban parts of the state.
I agree. We probably see it differently, but I think the rural part would really like to see the guest worker program more
Yeah,
so. But we get what you mentioned really is the real issue is we have this two-party system. The first 2 years of the Trump administration, they had both all the houses, and They could have changed. They could have put through any immigration law they wanted. And now we've got Joe Biden and the Democrats in control of all the houses, and they could pass anything they want. But neither party wants to fix the solution, or they would do it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They got the votes.
Sometimes like they just use the problems to further themselves.
Right. Yeah, they want this issue. You know, part of it may be big labor wants the cheap illegals coming in. I mean, I think there's more to it than if they wanted to fix it, they could do it. They just don't want to fix it.
You mentioned using all the tools in the toolbox. Is, you know, this is kind of a simple yes or no on some levels, maybe. But does the yeah, I know, right? As if there is any simple answers. But well, do you want to finish the wall? Do you think that the wall should be finished as what it was and the idea there? Do you think that's a good idea, or do you think we just need to abandon ship and go to other ideas immediately?
Well, you know, if you're going to come and say, well, the wall's not going to stop illegal immigration, I agree 100%. The wall will not stop it. If it's one of the tools that you can help to slow down the flow and control it, then yeah, I think you should put it in places where that happens. I mean, I've ridden horseback along the border, and there's areas where there's a 4-strand fence, wire fence that's not even up. And so I think, you know, whether we need the big beautiful wall, I don't know, but we do need some kind of in areas we need help controlling people coming across.
Sure.
Is that enough of a non-answer?
And, you know, I think that's
I think that's nice.
I'll go with it.
It's unfortunately, it's kind of a nuanced answer that you would, it seems that more independent minded people give, right? Like attacking it from like all the multiple angles. Yeah, definitely the work visa program, the immigration, you know, INS as a whole when it comes to just administering, letting people come back and forth. Yeah, building a wall, giving border patrol like the tools necessary to stem the flow. You know, maybe, you know, again, you know, curbing down the anti-interdiction stuff from the drug war would probably help a little bit, and also facilitating more free trade and stuff. But that's my libertarian coming out of me. But realistically, I mean, there's nuanced ways you could go about kind of stemming that flow. That would and making it more equitable and having people not necessarily, you know, hide in the shadows.
Right.
That would be nuanced, but you know, that's harder to do with the rhetoric of DC, I would imagine. So the American Rescue Plan, right? This is something that I mean is being thrust upon us in phases. We had you know, 2.2 trillion or 1.9? I don't know, I've lost track.
Yeah, I've lost zero.
For the stimulus, and then there's the infrastructure coming, and then there's even more stimulus coming with the child tax credits and stuff like that. Give us your take on the drunken sailor spending over the last 18 months and the other things. And what do you think of this American Rescue Plan that the president is trying to usher in?
Well, you know, when you talk about infrastructure, yeah, we need infrastructure, but currently I would vote against the new plan. Just the tax consequences involved in it, I think, will set us back even further. You know, the accelerated depreciation, you know, 40% capital gains rate. You're already seeing people reacting to just the possibility of it. And if it was an actual law, as far as the tax increases, I think it would be devastating to our country. You know, we live out here in the middle of nowhere. We don't have broadband, and it's hard to attract people to work here that have children that may have to be in school by or Zoom, or even just to do their homework with that. So yeah, there are some needs. My worry is you do a big infrastructure plan, a lot of it's going to be eaten up in just the NEPA process, because they're going to have to go in and do studies for at least a year and a half or 2 years before they can build a road or telephone line or power line or anything else. And so I think it's just set up for a ton more abuse, and we have to stop the spending sometime. And so, you know, as a banker for 25 years, I don't know how we're surviving the way we are with the national debt of $30 trillion.
Mhm.
So
Creative
I'm-
accounting.
Well, that is something I was going to ask you about, given your expertise in the matter, is, the dangers of inflation. And what do you expect, and what can be done to really stem the tide, so to speak?
Well, I think inflation, you're already seeing it. And of course, I was reading an article Yellen wrote today that it's only temporary, but housing's through the roof. My mom lives in Wichita Falls, Texas, and we just listed her house. And the realtor came in and said, "Well, I think it's worth X." And I said, "Well, let's raise the price 60,000, because that's what people are paying." And gas has gone up 30% in the last 100 days. Groceries are up, meat's up, corn's up, all these things are up. And I don't, a lot of it's the supply chain, but a lot of it is that's just what we're going to end up paying, because when everybody has more money in their pocket that the governor's given them, then they're going to go out and buy more. And that in turn is going to make prices go up. And we're in a vicious cycle. And how we solve it, we got to get people back to work.
Yeah.
Somehow we have to go back to work.
So how's that impacted these? You brought up corn, you brought up these input costs, right? Because that's what I've seen a lot of, just looking at tech and then looking at actual manufacturing. Just the input costs have gone up for all these things. You're a rancher. How much of those costs gone up to maintain a head of cattle and bring that to market and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, it's gone up probably 30% in the last year, but on the other hand, we're getting the less or same for our product as we were getting a year ago. So it's just going to put a crunch in our ability to do other things. I mean, to improve, we won't be able to buy as many T-posts as we normally would to put up a new fence. I mean, in turn, it's going to cut back our production.
And hence raise prices, right? I mean, or at least decrease supply with,
right.
The basic definition of inflation, a lot of dollars chasing too few goods. That's kind of going to contribute to it as well.
Right. And really who it's going to affect most are low-income people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, high-income people will not see as many of their dollars go to food as if you're low income. And it's, whether you're on food stamps or whatever, it's still going to affect you negatively. And you won't be able to buy the same products you could a year ago.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk oil and gas, man. Let's because you were the land commissioner. You were I mean, you were very instrumental in like filling the public coffers, particularly when it came to education, with these oil and gas leases, renewable energy leases, and stuff like that. What do you think of what's going on currently in your former position? These moratoriums on federal lands when it comes to drilling and fracking and stuff like that. I mean, what are your takes on that? Because you have a unique take on it, because you were in a state where you were in charge of making best use of these lands for the public good.
Right. Well, I am in favor of oil and gas, but I think it has to be done responsibly, and we have to protect our water and our environment. But along those lines, the story I like to tell is, when one time we all had horses and buggies, and we switched to gas-powered automobiles. Well, the reason we switched wasn't because we ran out of horses and buggies. The reason we switched was better technology. And I think we're in the same thing now. There's probably a 50-year supply of oil and reserves still to power our country at its current use. But the reason we're going to go from oil and gas to a new technology shouldn't, I think the climate change narrative is the wrong reason for what we're doing, because we're trying to force solar and wind to take the place of gas and oil. And I don't think the technology and the batteries are there to actually do that yet. You talk about how we run the ranch. I don't know how I'm going to be able to get cattle from our ranch to market with a solar powered or a battery powered semi truck yet. Maybe it's coming, but I think the battery technology is not there yet. So I think just like when gasoline engines came along, I think there's still technology emerging that will save us without having a whole bunch of tax incentives to pay for it, like wind and solar. So I think whether it's nuclear fission, or whether it's nuclear, or whether it's hydrogen, I think there's technologies coming to save us. As far as the oil gas moratorium that the Biden administration is going to be devastating to New Mexico. And you said, well, we've got all these wells producing. The problem is they're also stopping the right-of-ways from the oil wells to the pipelines. So there's no way to get the product back over to where we can use it. And, it's just going to devastate our state. And I think in the long run, I think, there's a chance a year from now we're paying $8 a gallon for gas versus $3, and the EV cars aren't going to be there to take care of it. And so this energy deal is super complicated. And even this Avangrid PNM merger, I think, is headed for a disaster for New Mexicans. Avangrid is owned by Iberdrola, which is a Spanish company, which they were one of the main culprits in the wind or the big weather problem in Texas a few months ago. Yet we're going to put them fully in charge of our electric grid. So, at one time we were controlled by foreign oil. Now we're going to be controlled by foreign electrical grids also.
So go into detail about those right-of-ways, because I don't think people truly understand like the systematic implications of this moratorium, which I assume is supposed to end pretty soon. But what does that mean? Like not being able to utilize these right-of-ways to move product?
So like when I became land commissioner, to get a right-of-way, like you want to put a power line to the well site so you can run a pump to pump the oil and gas out, or if you need to put a pipeline to take the oil and gas from the well to a distribution line, you have to buy a right-of-way from whoever owns the land, whether it's the state or private or the BLM. And so when I took over as land commissioner, it took almost a year to get a right-of-way through the land office because it was so screwed up. When I left, I think we were at 45 days. We got it down to 30 days for a while, but about 45 days is the quickest. So then what the Biden administration has done is, okay, we're gonna put a moratorium on oil and gas on federal lands, but at the same time, even the wells that are existing, you drill a new well, you can't get the oil from the well to the pipeline or the produced water out of there. So you can't use that well. So the right-of-ways are a big deal. And then you shut those down, then you've basically shut down producing wells, not just new ones.
What do you say to the critics who say that they can probably use? Well, I guess you were famously known for throwing a solar powered like pump, I guess, or in front of the land commission office or somewhere, and that there are actually some wells that actually utilize solar, but like that's irrelevant if you can't move the product. I guess is the ultimate question, right? So wow, that is something I did not know.
You could put solar on there, but if you can't get the pipeline across the ground into another pipeline, then the oil just sits there.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal.
So the Department of Workforce Solutions Secretary has resigned, citing threats and other things. I mean, I think it's telling somewhat with the political climate, but what is your thoughts on this increasingly hostile political climate, and what do you think can be done to change that? And what are the risks associated with public office?
As land commissioner, I only had one death threat.
That's
pretty good.
I've had more than that this year alone. So
yeah, and I turned it in to state police, and they contacted the guy, and he actually sent me an apology, I think, after the police showed up. And I think part of it is the way our society and digital communication occurs, that we say things to people online that we'd never say in person, or to their face. And a part of it, I think, and one of the reasons why I'm running is the last 12 months of watching Trump and Biden and the complete disrespect for individuals and the way people treated each other is a problem. And that's one of the reasons I'm running as an independent. I just was tired of the rhetoric and thought we needed to change it somehow. As far as public officials being feared, I'm not sure it's as big an issue. I think there's more threats online than there are against persons' bodies. But, during the riots and everything, we have to protect people, no matter what their political ideology is. And it's just getting crazy. But that's one of the reasons why I ran.
Yeah.
Trying to stop the insanity.
With all the insanity, I know that you've, in some of your ads, it's been mentioned that you've got to be real careful and that your wife doesn't want you tracking all that political BS into the house anymore. Do you feel like if you were to win this seat, how are you going to keep from tracking that BS back home? Is it just because she'll just kick you out and you'll stay in Washington, or?
No, I'll probably have to get me a little camper on part of the ranch and stay in it somewhere. but there's a chance there's a chance we're going to win this. And if that were to happen, it would shake the entire foundation of the current political system, in my opinion. So, if independent won in a little seat here in New Mexico, I think it would wake up both parties, finally.
You may very well be right, sir. We really appreciate you coming on. This has been an enlightening discussion, to say the least. So hopefully you get a nice camper, and we wish you all.
Because if you get a nice camper, that means that you were successful and that we might be on the right track.
Well, if I win, we'll have to have another meeting, right?
Well, I sure hope that if you win, you'd grace us with your presence again. So.
Guaranteed.
All right. Well, Mr. Dunn, thank you very much. That's been our latest edition of New Mexico Rising, the Meet the Press of New Mexico right after church. Is that what we described it? We gotta clean up that tagline.
Kind of. It's something like that. I don't know. That sounds like Baca's job.
Yeah, exactly. So with that said, take us out of here, Baca.
I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and make sure to tune in next week. We will have Jay Block, who will be running for governor of New Mexico. He's throwing his what's the euphemism? His hat in the ring. Am I getting that right? Or am I mixing
I think it's the hat in the ring. If he has sunglasses, does he throw those in the ring as well? Just like that.
Just like that.
Watching, everybody.